Hello, and welcome to the Postcode Revolution podcast, talking the future on your doorstep. I'm Jack Cooper, founder and director of Postcode Revolution, an organisation focused on community building and emergency climate adaptation in the neighbourhoods we call home. This series explores the ideas of Postcode Revolution to change the world of business as usual. This week, I'm joined by Mahnaz Bhatti. Mahnaz is an NLP master coach, consultant, trainer, and founder of the Discovery Space, a local community coaching space where coaches offer their services in the spirit of the gift to their neighbourhood. Mahnaz was also a member of Waltham Forest Mutual Aid during the COVID pandemic, a network providing resources and support to 20 ward mutual aid groups. Welcome to the podcast, Mahnaz.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you for having me.
I want to start with the story of the Discovery Space, Mahnaz. Could you explain to our listeners what it is and the story of how it came about?
So, in terms of context, I was running a coaching program to train people in the art of coaching. And a couple of them, after they'd finished the training, said, how do we practice? And I thought, well, there's no better way of practicing something that you're learning by doing it in the community. And at the same time, there was a picture of a 5-year-old handcuffed at an airport in America because of the Trump ban against Muslims. And I was livid. I saw this picture. My daughter's the same age at the time. And I was really, really angry and thought, I need to do something. I need to do something to get people together, to get to know each other through the labels, through the perceived perception of our reality, whatever it may be, but just to see the human underneath it all. So I went back home, I picked the phone up and called a friend who's also a coach, lives near us. And I said to her, I really need to talk about creating something. And Nat said, so what is it that you want to create? And I said, I don't know. I explained what had happened. And I said, I just need to hold a space for people to see each other as human without the labels. And she said, okay, kind of like discovery environment. And I said, yeah, the discovery space. And so that's how it came about. And she said, what's the agenda? I said, there is no agenda. She said, nobody will come if there's no agenda. I said, but how do you know that? She said, I don't. Let's do it. So I said, don't have a venue, don't have funding. I'll do it around my dining room table. And so she said she'd invite a couple of parents from her school. I invited some parents from my school. And I also invited my then 85-year-old neighbour, who I see as my hero. I live in Chingford, which is very blue, very conservative. And Charles was the first person that I met when we moved into our home. And he basically helped me to get into the house after I'd locked myself out on the day that we arrived by lifting the gate to the side of our house. As an 85-year-old, he became my hero. So I invited him along. I put some paper on the table with some pens, not knowing anything about what was going to happen. Had some cups ready for some tea, biscuits, and everybody came, not knowing what was going to happen, sat down, and we all introduced ourselves. And Charles said, my name is Charles, I live across the road, and I go 3 weeks sometimes without human contact. And I thought, that's not going to happen on my watch. So since then, up until the day he passed, and my daughter and I went to visit him once a week, and I'd give him food. We'd have conversations, we'd laugh. He'd support me, whatever I was going through. It was just a listening ear. It was lovely just to be with him. I learned so much about the war, which he'd been in, and how he didn't like celebrating or being involved in D-Day. It was really interesting. Anyway, so the other parents were sat around the table and were talking about things that were quite deep for them, that they'd never shared in public before or with even members of their own family. So we talked, some of them were doodling on paper, and there was some advice that was being said, some sharing of stories that they'd been through. And it got to 1 o'clock where it was ending, and I said, okay, time's up, guys. We need to go. We need to split. Nobody wanted to leave. And I thought, okay, there's something in this, and I don't know what it is. So that's how it began. From that moment on, I ran the discovery space once a month for 1.5 hours as a way of giving back to my community the coaching skills that I have, and for them to be able to speak without judgment or without any labels or without me even being a coach. So it kind of evolved as a space to just speak your mind and be okay to be speaking your mind.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing about it so beautifully.
Thank you for holding the space for me to do so. Bit of a discovery going on here, isn't
There's this next,
it?
I'd
Yeah.
like to chat about Waltham Forest Mutual Aid, a
Mm.
local community support network you were part of during the COVID pandemic. Could you take us back to that time and how this response came about?
Yeah. Obviously, we all went into lockdown and we were told not to leave our homes, and people were in a state of shock. And the government wasn't, or the councils weren't able to respond in the way they were expected to be responding because they'd never been through anything like that before. So for everybody, it was a shock, and it was interesting for me because I was like, what's going to emerge? What's going to happen here? I do remember that there was a message on social media that went out saying, if you'd like to get involved in supporting your neighbours, get in touch. Now, I didn't even know what mutual aid was then. I don't understand the concept, never heard of it. But what a brilliant idea. What an absolutely brilliant idea. So somebody suggested it and said, if you'd like to support your neighbours, then come to this WhatsApp group. And so I joined the WhatsApp group with a whole pile of other people. And then through those WhatsApp groups, there were some ward level WhatsApp groups that were created. So every council has wards, and each ward has a councillor or 3 councillors. And so everyone, whoever wanted to be proactive with it, just joined the ward group in which they lived. And so through that, I met Sarah and H, who lived in my ward. And I didn't know either of them, but Sarah was on it. She was really on it. And she said, right, okay, what we need to do is find out who needs help in our street, and we need to get prescriptions and food, basic necessities sorted for them. And so all the volunteers came together, and through the volunteers, what emerged was a coordinators group, the people that were actively coordinating things on the ground, which then I became a part of. And so we were working together to look at the map of our ward, which I'd never even knew existed. And then we looked at the streets that we lived on, and we created clusters of streets. And once we created those clusters, we then spoke to neighbours and asked them if they needed any help. And through that, we realized and started establishing the vulnerable people in our streets that needed help. So the elderly, and anyone who basically needed any support, disabled, if they needed it, if they wanted it. So they were at choice. Now, I had already been giving food to Charles across the road. And so we created another spin off from that in our street, which was a food sharing group for people that need food. So we did that. What I learned from that experience was people want to help. They genuinely want to help. Everybody wants to help each other. When there's no fear, People want to help. And there are no labels. There are no labels, no differentiation between, whether you're politically aligned with one party or another. It doesn't matter. You want to help them, whether they were of a certain faith or whatever. It didn't matter because you wanted to go and help a human being because it feels good to help somebody else. And it's uplifting. So there's no control, there were no expectations. And the way the community came together was just incredible. I think there are hundreds of these things happening across the world. They probably already happen in community in the global south. But I think it's becoming more and more important in the global north. I mean, when I was growing up, I didn't know my neighbors at all. Maybe one or two, but that was it. Now I know everybody. And I think my sisters know all their neighbors and my family know all their neighbors now. But there's like an evolving, naturally conscious evolution of how important community is because of the shit we find ourselves with, the types of governments and the party systems that we're in, the political systems that we're living in. And I think there's a natural call, even like from an environmental space in terms of climate, there is a natural call for community and connection. You would select the best counselor for your community when you know your community. At the moment, we're just selecting the best of a bunch that we don't know. We don't know any of them.
What advice do you have on navigating political polarization in community spaces from both the discovery space and the mutual aid groups?
Stay away from it. Don't talk about it. It's so hard though, isn't it, Jack? Because people will go where they feel safe and where they will go with who they feel safe with, whether that's a party or a person. But from a political standpoint, what if you had a prime minister who was a young woman who's come from a state school education in the Midlands, who just loves people? Would that be a possibility in this day and age? No. But could she influence her community? Yes. Could she stand out in her community? Yes. Does she need to be eaten educated? No. But there's a myth that, you have to be a certain ilk to be the right person for the job. And what we need is more people that have lived a life, really. Why don't we have a doctor that's running a healthcare in the government? It's a mess. I don't like the political system that we have. The system is wrong, it's broken. But people believe in it. It's all we have. But what else could we have? I do think local politics will change. It has to. And it has to come from grassroots. It has to come from within the community in which it's being represented. So shipping someone over from another borough doesn't work. They don't know the streets. They don't know the people. A friend of mine said the other day, it's like we live in a barrel and the barrel is real, but you have a little hole in the barrel and you look through it and you say, oh my God, there's so much more out there. But nobody really looks out that hole.
That brings us to the end of the conversation. Thank you.
I want to thank you for doing this because voices are important, especially the ones that don't fit the narrative. And I'm realizing that more and more.
Thank you, Mahnaz. And thank you, everyone, for listening to this. This podcast was produced and edited by me, Jack Cooper, with music by Lisa Mira and Boomtown. Please rate and share the podcast if you enjoyed it, and if you'd like to support Postcode Revolution and dive deeper into these ideas, you can become a supporter for £5 a month on Patreon and access the extended cut of this conversation and all the others in the series. Thanks for listening. See you in 2 weeks.